Let's get started. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Hope you guys have been doing well in your KFT runs. Let's talk about some arena.
Let's do that. Let's talk about some arena. We've had 2 weeks where we've talked about arena stuff, but not a lot, like half practical stuff and half non-practical. This whole entire Lightforge is going to be about practical things you can use to help you win games, or figure out the meta. So why don't we start with something that everyone has to do, and it's the first thing you do in every game. Just kick it right off, dive right in. Deep fried meta, where we're deep frying the meta, and our topic today is what's different about mulligans now, and when do you use a safe mulligan and when do you use a greedy mulligan, and what are they? What is a safe mulligan? What is a greedy mulligan? So I'll set this up with the starting point, which is that if you talked to us a year ago, we would have been pretty adamant that you just throw away stuff until you find twos if you go first. And if you go second and you have a lot of threes, maybe you keep a 3 and go for like the pass, coin 3 play, and then go on from there. But generally, you want to search for twos going first, and going second, you want to do either 2-2-3-4 if possible. If not, then like 2-4-4 is fine, but you have to have the 2. You don't just keep a 4 and hope you get the 2. And or 3-3-4 is also possible. I think that applies a little less now. What do you think? What's changed?
What has changed? Well, first of all, this all depends on, like you said, what we had been doing previously, right? But now, I think one of the biggest changes I've noticed is that my early game, just generally, not for like the super aggressive decks that I sometimes still draft, for example, Hunter, but generally, my decks are a little bit shakier on the curve. Mm-hmm. So I'm a little bit more afraid of just not getting any early game, right?
I mean, the 2-drop Apocalypse is here.
Yeah, 2-drop Apocalypse is here. Also, I still remember the way you spelled Dropocalypse, and that was terrible. That was just a tragedy in its own way. But we're past that, and we never have to type that again.
Apocalypse?
Yeah, we won't have to type that until the next expansion, in which they won't release 2-drops, which has been like the past 4 expansions. Anyways, getting too far into that, but we do have a situation now where you don't have enough 2-drops and you don't have enough strong 1-drops to make up for it as well, right? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times you can have a 1-drop followed up by a hero power, and that's just as good as a 2-drop. So because I find myself sort of being very anxious about my early game, sometimes I will settle for kind of a mediocre 3-drop, or I'll just settle for kind of a mediocre 2-drop, and then saying this is fine. Like all I have to do is play something in the early game, and then my late game and my decision making will pull me through.
Okay, so right now, let's say you have a normal draft. Okay, let's back up a step. What is a safe or greedy mulligan? Like if you're keeping a 2-2, for example, going first, looking to play it on turn 2, is that safe? Is that greedy?
I think part of it depends on the deck, right? Like, because you say a 2-2, I'm like, well, if it's just a 2-2 that doesn't do anything, and like it could be safe in a way, right? You're like, oh, okay, like I don't have that many 2s. Let's just play this, and this is fine. It could also be a greedy play, just because it could be like a Shadow Ascendant, right? Or it could be a pint-sized summoner, and you're just like, oh no, this could like really work out with some of the other stuff in my deck. Let's go for it. Mm-hmm. So it does actually depend on the minion and the deck. So what I have found more often is that in the first scenario, that'll happen more often. I'm just like, this isn't great, but I'm still going to keep it. I'm still going to toss it out. It could get dominated. Kind of don't care.
Okay. That's fair. I think when it comes to keeping a 2-2, for example, that is generally by far the safest play. Even if you're keeping a Shadow Ascendant, which has an ability, it's not really greedy, because what you're looking for is potentially a better 2-drop, and you're not looking for it. So you're just being very, very safe at that point. A greedy mulligan would be, say, throw away the 2/2 and try to get a 2/3 back, right? And that's usually, in today's like meta, not worth it. If you're talking about a year ago, you totally don't keep 2/2s if you have your normal 5/6/2 drop. You totally need a 3/2 or a 2/3, or else bad things are about to happen. So here now, it's still better to get a 2/3 or 3/2, especially if you have, like, let's say 6/2 drops, and then all of them are 3/2s and 2/3s, except for one, which is a 2/2, and you get that on your mulligan. You can still feel free to mulligan it away, but you don't have to anymore, because the chances that your opponent can punish you for having a 2/2 is pretty low these days. And so it's just not as big of a deal. And there's also a lot more taunts to help you get back. And there's a lot more, like, the game is a lot more less like Curvestone. So you can really afford to be safer and less greedy with your mulligans, is my point, when it comes to 2-drops. But on the flip side, let's move away from 2-drops. Let's say you don't have a 2-drop. Let's say you're going first, and you have a 4-drop. Now, a year ago, we'd say toss that back. You need your 2-drops. You're going to top deck your 4-drops, like, really high chance to top deck your 4-drops anyway. There's no need to, like, keep a 4-drop around where you don't have a 2 or a 3. Or even if you just have a 3, right? You don't just, like, say, oh, screw 2-drops. I'm going to just, like, have a nice 4-drop and that'll be okay. And if you were to keep a 4-drop, let's say with a 3-drop, but with no 2-drops, would that be greedy or would that be safe? And that's a little more iffy, right? Because on one hand, when you keep the 4-drop, you're not really safe.
No.
You're like the opposite of safe. You're actually giving yourself only like 3 draws to get your 2-drop rather than potentially 4 draws if you only kept the 3-drop, or 5 draws if you fall mulligan, right? So you cut down the number of chances you have to actually curve out on 2 by half. That's not safe at all. On the other hand, it's kind of safe because presumably when you're keeping a 4-drop, you're keeping a really nice 4-drop, right? You don't just keep any 4. You don't keep a 4/4, for example. You're going to keep like Ascension Shieldmaster at least. You're going to keep something that's good when you're behind. And it's going to be something that'll help you get back on the board, right? So maybe that is safe because now you're saying, well, I'm keeping this card where even if I lose the board, which I seem likely to anyway because I don't have that many good 2-drops in my deck anyway, and I only have like at most 5 more draws into it. I've already missed on my first 3 cards in the mulligan. So maybe the safe play is now actually to kind of hold back a little bit, like basically concede the board in the early couple turns. Remember, our opponents aren't going to have good 2-drops either, so a lot of times your opponents are going to ping nothing or drop a 2/2, and it's not the scariest thing in the world. And then you kind of come back into it. So when you keep a 4-drop, it's a little more iffy whether it's safe or greedy.
Yeah, that is really true. And while you were talking about that, something that I've thought that just popped into my head is one 4-drop that I've seen people keep because I track my opponent's hand and I see being played to very good effect is actually Tolvir Stoneshaper. I don't know if you've noticed this, but so one of the reasons for keeping it is not just sort of for greed or for safe. It's just because they have a synergy in their hand, right? Because if they're player 2, they can play like something like Volatile Elemental coin into a 3/5 with Taunt.
Yeah, it's a little different because you already have a 2-drop. At that point, it's not even greedy. You're just going 2/4/4. That's pretty normal.
Yeah, it's just the synergy is so strong that you like keep a 4, right? Yeah. Like if we're just talking about keeping,
I think you can push your premise further. I think if you had like a 3-mana elemental, like a Tar Creeper, you can, and a Tolvir after that, you can just skip your 2.
Yes, and I have seen that as well. They only like either from myself or my opponent, they do that because Tar Creeper is just overstated for turn 3 anyways. Whatever you lose, you gain some of it or all of it back on turn 3 just by doing that. And then you gain it back even more on turn 4. So whatever you lose on turn 2, you gain back on just turn 3 or turn 3 and turn 4 with the Tar Creeper into the Tolvir Stoneshaper. So that I see that being kept a lot more. And it's not just sort of like, well, what was kept before on that could be played on 4 mana? Something like True Silver, right? Something that had
True Silver was a good keep. It was one of like the rare things where you're like, yeah, just keep it for 4 even if you don't have a 2, it's fine. You're gonna catch back up.
Yeah. So I think that is interesting as well, how these synergies have sort of changed, like your mulligan, and now have sort of impacted the amount of times that you keep a 4-drop. And that, like Tovir Stone Shaper is something that I see all the time now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think right now the doors are a little open to more creative mulligans than before. Before, we just had to hammer it into people's heads because they kept wanting to keep random 4-drops that they liked. No, you get your 2s first, then your 3s, then your 4s. Like that's the line you go. I don't care how much you like the 4-drop, you need your 2s. Now it's a little like, well, first of all, is the 4-drop really good? Second of all, is the 4-drop going to synergize with something that's on your board earlier? Or is it a card that's very, very good for coming back? So in either of those situations, like Tovir is actually both, because 3-5 is a really good stat line, right? Like for coming back onto the board. You basically want to make sure that you have high health, low attack when you're coming back in that way, right? Like if you want to keep a 3, for example, going first, you have to anticipate your opponent may have a 2, and if they have a 2, you want your 3 to be able to handle it. So something like a 3-4 would be perfect, but even like a 2-4 would be okay, whereas a 3-3 would be a lot more iffy of a keep, right? Something like Scarlet Crusader would be totally fine as a keep, whereas something like, I don't know, Murloc War Leader, you wouldn't keep, even if it was a good card, right? Like, similar thing if you had like an Aldor and you just wanted to blow it early on as a safety, like, look, I want to at least be pretty much on the board even if I miss my 2-drop because I'm a paladin. I have a total of 2 or 3 2-drops in the deck anyway. Like, totally okay now.
I agree. Although in your Aldor example, did you ever not keep Aldor? Because I always kept Aldor.
I think I threw Aldor away because I was greedy and I wanted to get it back later on and actually use it on a bigger minion. But now I keep it. Now I keep it.
Yeah, I think that is an always keep for me. Whether going first or going second, I will always keep an Eldor Peacekeeper because no matter what, I am almost ensured that on turn 3, I'm good, right? Like whatever they put out, I can dominate it with the Eldor Peacekeeper, and this way I don't get off the board.
I think that's what's important, right? We keep mentioning this. You need to have something that is really good playing from behind, not just something that's really, really good. Like, a Stonehill Defender is good. You don't want to keep it, because it's not really a 3-drop. It doesn't do anything coming from behind or being up ahead. It's just like, it's not getting the job done. You don't want a Hosen Healer, even though it's our highest rated 4-drop tied with Keening Banshee right now. Because Hosen Healer requires you to have an injured minion to do anything. And you're not going to have an injured minion if you're not on the board, right? Like, you don't want to keep that Dark Iron Dwarf, because a 4-4 is not that great. And you're not going to have a minion to buff. You want to keep your Yetis, maybe your 3-5s, but 3-5s aren't that good. So like a 3-5 that has an extra ability or something like that would be fine. And for 3-drops, you don't want to keep your 4-3s. They don't do anything because you don't have the board. They're going to get eaten by your opponent's Raptors. Like, you want to keep your 2-4s and your 3-4s definitely, or your like fancy 3-drops that like Scarlet Crusader. So I want to get that like really clear. So it's not just keep 4-drops, it's keep the ones that allow you to get back onto the board or will match up really well against your opponent's lower drops. And let's also talk about the reverse side of it. At what point do you absolutely need to mulligan for your 2s?
If I'm playing an aggressive deck, there's no way I am settling for 3s, right? And sometimes these days when I play Hunter and I know that the only way I am winning is by early snowball, early advantage, right? I think it's become even more important these days for Hunter to get a 1-drop, because it's possible for any sort of class to get to sort of snowball on the board, right? I'm not saying it's likely, but it's possible because of all the neutral cards out there. So if I'm the Hunter, I need to be on the board first. I need to prevent their snowball so I can snowball on the board. So sometimes as Hunter, I look at let's say, I have a decent 2-drop, but if I have those 2-drops and I'm just like, no, I just really need one of my 1-drops, I might even mulligan the 2-drop away and just say, okay, I'll grab any 2-drop from my deck. I think that's fine. I have a high chance for it. I just need that 1-drop. So I think that's an extreme example where I'm going really greedy here, right? Like I say, okay, a Pompous Thespian. No, I don't want this Pompous Thespian, even though it's a guaranteed pretty good play on 2 because I have other 2-drops, like maybe 7 more 2-drops in my deck, right? And I'm happy
even
with
if they're less good than a 3/2. They're like a 2/2, and that's okay if you have a 1-drop.
Right, like one of them will be a Scavenging Hyena, right? In which case, I'm not very happy if I don't play anything on 1 and then play a Scavenging Hyena, but my chance of drawing a 2 are very high, and I just really want to spike that 1-drop to start the snowball, and because that's kind of the only way I can win with that sort of deck.
I think this goes along with what's been happening in the world of Hearthstone Arena. There's a lot more rock, paper, scissors going on since 7.1, where your deck archetype defines a lot of whether you will win a game or not, rather than your actual play. And so you have to lean into the deck archetype if you're going. Like, if you're not making a mid-range deck, you have to make a control deck that beats other control decks, because you'll see plenty of real good control decks. If you're making an aggro deck, you need to make an aggro deck that can deal with decks that will like recover using primordial drakes and whatnot. Why? Because there will be a bunch of those decks and you're going to need to beat them if you want to do well. So if you're control, you need to be able to beat control decks, and if you're aggro, you also need to be able to beat, I guess, like mid-rangey like defensive decks by going faster. So control decks need to go a little slower, aggro decks need to go a little faster, and part of that is deck building, of course, but when you have a kind of a less consistency on the 2s with the deck types, the control decks will say, oh, I don't need 2s that much, 3/2s are fine. And the aggro decks will say, oh, I really need the 2s because there's a bunch of these like tar creepers and primordial drakes and just stuff I need to get through. So I need to like really be on top of my game, especially now in KFT when they reward the board so much. You are like doubly incentivized to like stay on the board. So when it comes to creating a deck, you get like 1s and 2s as much as you can. But also when you're mulliganing, you have to do the same thing. You have to mulligan even lower than you would normally mulligan. I find myself in aggro decks just mulliganing for 1s all the time too. I don't know if I would actually not keep a 3/2. I don't think I'm as aggressive as you play, but I would definitely, like, if I had a 2/3 at going with player 1, I would definitely mulligan the 3-drop if I had plenty of 1-drops to fish for, because I still have plenty of chances to get another 3-drop back. If I'm going second, I definitely mulligan away the 3-drop if I have 1-drops to go for, because then I have a coin to make everything okay, even if I get another 2-drop, right? So it used to be really rare if you had a good 2 and a good 3, even if you're going second, to not just keep them both. If you have no other cards to build your, like, if your other 2 cards that you're mulliganing away are like 8-drops or something, you have to mulligan away anyway. It would be kind of like, no, just keep your 2 and your 3 and go for it. But now, if you're playing an aggressive deck and you have like even like 4 1-drops in your deck and like 5 other 2s, which is not terribly aggressive, but definitely aggressive, you don't want that 3. That 3 is not helping you by staying in your hand. That's too safe, and you can't be that safe in a rock, paper, scissors meta.
Yeah, and it just goes to what, like, the power level of your deck and what you can get away with, right? And well, you know, this isn't so different from previous metas where it is really just an analysis of your deck, right? And your win condition and how safe you need to be. What we're talking about is there is a shift just because of like the offering rates and just because of sort of
all the buffs.
Yeah. So I think that is something to look out for, and it's something overall that's very important because mulligans, I've always thought mulligans were the most important thing in the game that is consistently sort of underrated.
Yes.
Right. Because I think in a lot of players' mind, it's like I spend so much time on the draft, right? And it's like I have so many decisions. I spend so much time in the game. The mulligan is just like these few seconds before a game, and it's like, oh yeah, I just keep 2s, 3s. I don't know, maybe. Right.
Yep.
And then they're like, all right, let's start the game. But it has a profound impact on whether you win or lose because the beginning turns are so important, and you're deciding right then and there
what your odds are.
Yeah, what your odds are at the beginning of the game. Yeah. So
it also like differs on matchups. You also want to mulligan more aggressively against Paladin and Priest, for example, because you really need to control the board or you lose. Hunter as well, right? Paladin, Priest, Hunter are the 3 classes where I'm like, I need to be on the board immediately, or I need to have a way to get back on the board immediately. Like, I don't want them to be there. Like, for Paladin, I don't want to be there on turn 4. For Hunter, I don't want to be there at all. The same for Priest.
Yeah.
I don't want to be them to be on the board at all. So that's another consideration to make. And basically, since 7.1, and definitely now by KFT, this is like built into the arena game right now. Mulligans are just more complicated. Like, that is one area where the game actually got more complicated. Like, I would argue that overall 7.1 and all these changes have made the arena game simpler and less complicated, but the Mulligan has definitely gotten more complicated. Like, drafting's gotten easier, gameplay's gotten easier, but mulliganing has gotten more complicated. Mostly because before, Mulligan was actually pretty easy. And it was always like I never understood why, like, even halfway decent players would ever mulligan it incorrectly. Like, it was just such like basic sets of rules to follow. And now, so much of that goes out the window and is deck dependent and opponent dependent and all that. So, this has definitely gotten very complicated, I think.
Yep.
Okay. So, moving on from our deep fried meta, it's good to welcome back deep fried meta. We haven't done deep fried meta in a while because we've been reviewing like cards, and the expansion just came out. But now we're back to these like nice 15-20 minute deep dives into the game and how to play the game. So I hope that was helpful. Let's talk. The next thing that we did is the Lightforge tier list got an update on, I think, like Friday morning, and another update today. This is Sunday afternoon, to like fix like some bugs that were. It was like, on one hand, they were just bugs, nothing new special happened. On the other hand, they affected like 3 very often played cards by like 30 points. So it was a bug, and thank you to Taro for catching that. Ignoring the bug part, I want to talk about the whole changes that's been happening. And we'll start with the biggest actual meta change that we did. We're going to do a more comprehensive, like, actual stat by stat change on the meta in a few more weeks. So then everything will shift again, and we're going to reset. There's more fancy stuff happening over the course of this expansion in particular. But for now, the first thing that we thought we needed to do as soon as possible was to up our hard removals. And that's because the expectations of how many hard removals you have fundamentally changed. And how useful hard removals are to the game has really changed. One of the things that we always knew coming into the KFT meta was that no one got hard removals, like, pretty much. Small, not even mid removals, just only small removals or no removals at all. And so we had an inkling that this was the direction things were going to go, but we didn't quite, like, pull the trigger on it. And then we played some, and it was, you leave your opponent with stuff on the board, it's going to get bone marred into this huge giant thing that you're going to need to get rid of because it also has Taunt. There are just huge giant things, whether it's the Lich King or something else. Boards are getting more complicated, and so you'll always, even if the hard removal is not the best removal to use, you want the flexibility to be able to remove exactly what you need to. You don't want to get to the point where they have something hidden behind a taunt with like 4 health and you can only deal 3 damage, right? So the fact that the hard removal, hard removals are not being used too much more efficiently, meaning like the size of the target it hits on average is not too much larger than they used to be. But the times in which, like, the importance in which when you use the hard removal and the flexibility of hard removals to really remove anything is a lot more important now in KFT than they used to be. So just so you know, when you're drafting, like, a lot of the hard removal cards went up by like a ton. Like, Polymorph went up by like 20 points, just to give an example. It is now tied with Fireball. Well, not quite tied. It's above Fireball now, actually. It's 2 points above Fireball right now. And that was never the case before. This is the first time ever Polymorph has been above Fireball. And also Fireball keeps getting worse because things keep getting to have more than 6 health. So it goes 2 ways on that particular one. But it's one of those things where you're going to see hard removals significantly up across the board. And that'll make for, I think, a more accurate drafting experience. They're all premium cards. They used to be premium cards, but now it should be like very much flagged in your mind. Like, don't skip this. Doesn't matter if you need a curve. Doesn't matter if you need whatever. You don't pass up these hard removals. Because they're rare. Even in hard removal classes like Mage, they're rare. And when you play against them, you should have that in mind. Don't be afraid of hard removal. Bait 1 out, and then you're good. There's not that many hard removals left in the game. They're just not being offered that much more. So play to that. And if you have a hard removal, like really think twice before using it for tempo. Like, are you sure your opponent doesn't have big things that need to be hard removed left in their hand? Or like, are you so desperate that if you don't make this push and get this damage into their face right now, you're just not going to win? If those conditions aren't true, if you could wait. So that's the value of hard removals right now in this meta. And similarly, poisonous minions also got a small bump up. They are kind of hard removals, kind of vaguely similar. So that's what's been happening there. That's the biggest change stat-wise. We also, once again, updated some of the assumptions on like, how many taunts are in this class and that class, all that stuff. But the second thing I really want to talk about is taunt and stealth. And I want to throw this over to you to see this. Like, I haven't actually run this by Merp, so this will be really interesting what he thinks about it. Okay, so taunt, first of all, like just like philosophically, take this like, whiteboard, you're creating a game, you're drawing this, you know that there's this thing called a taunt mechanic, you know that Hearthstone is a game, and you're trying to make a tier list, right? You're trying to say like, how good is taunt going to be? What is taunt doing? Let's set aside the fact that taunt prevents things from going face. We're already accounting for that in our survivability calculations. That's done correctly. Let's just assume that. So what kind of points? How do you give points for something for having taunt?
How do I give points for something that has taunt?
Yeah, like how much better is a bear that has taunt compared to a 3/3 that doesn't? What about a 2/7 with taunt versus a 2/7 that doesn't? What about a gastropod that has essentially unlimited attack, but like a very low health? How do these things work taunt-wise?
All right. Well, I mean, I think you would want to look at the main advantage of a taunt in the first place. Like, even though it protects your face, we've already accounted for that. But more importantly, it changes the board, right? It impacts the board, and it protects minions as well. So you can place it out there, and it's like a pseudo initiative, right? So
it has half initiative.
Right, it has half initiative. So that's what we give points for. We give points for initiative, and we give, sort of points for stuff that also just changes the board, impacts the board, doesn't just like plop down as a pile of stats and does nothing.
Okay. But so how much? Like, what is a 2/7? Like, is the stats of the minion, does it matter? Or do you just like give like everything that has taunt gets 5 points? Like,
it should definitely matter, because you want to look at the distribution, right? If there is a theoretical 10-1 taunt, like a Magma-ist Rager with taunt, how much is that taunt worth? Not that much, right? Because it can die to a ping, it can die to a 1/1, and you can see the reason for it. It's not just because Magma Rager sucks, which is true, but it's because the taunt's effect on 1 health is very minimal, right? But on the flip side, the taunt's effect on something that is very high health is very good, because the taunt sort of acts on your opponent's board.
Mulligan, best card.
Well, yeah. So this is the third prong of it, in which, just like how the 10-1 isn't good, the 1/10, or the Mogushan's point, the 1/7 isn't so good, because you want the taunt to actually do something with its effect, right? It's like it taunts and it forces them to hit into it, but at the same time, you're like, you got to do something other than tickle them, right? Which is really what the Mogushan does. And, it's fine when it doesn't cost as much as a Mogushan, like a Crypt Lord, for example. But, when you're paying a lot of mana, you also don't want like very polar taunts. And this is why like taunts, like a 4/6 taunt, right? Druid of the Claw is just very, very good. Like, it has just enough attack and it has more health. And it's like a very good combination of attack and defense for it to be, very relevant in the meta.
Yep. I think that's right. I think that is a good overview of how taunts actually function, right? Like in the game.
Yeah.
Now, tier list systems before our old system just gave numbers. We said taunts are good if you had X amount of health and X amount of attack. You get this many points for being a taunt. It gets adjusted by mana cost. It was simplistic, but it balanced the attack and the health in a way that reflected our experiences in the real game. If you take simple algorithm systems, like Hearth Arena, for example, they will give points for giving something a taunt based on how many, you know, like taunt points there are. That's how all the systems used to work. But now the Lightforge tier list has a very hefty backend already. So it's doing some interesting things. Like, it knows what all the board states are. It knows the opponent's health. It knows the opponent's attacks. It knows your health, your attack. So it actually knows what minions it's protecting at what situations. And when you're protecting a minion, let's say your job is to protect your Cult Master. Do you want a Gastropod or do you want a Mogushan?
Right. I mean, if you're protecting something like that, you want a Mogushan.
You clearly want a Mogushan. A Mogushan is like 10 times better than a Gastropod. On the other hand, if you're facing down a 7/7, do you want a Mogushan or a Gastropod?
Right. I mean, because the Mogushan does absolutely nothing. You're stuck in a very bad spot still.
Exactly. So when you're protecting the board, and because when you're protecting the board, what you're protecting is the value of the board, not the value of the minion. The only thing that matters from the minion stats perspective is the health. The attack has no matter. That's when you're protecting the Cult Master. On the other hand, as a minion itself, what happens when you give it Taunt is that you make it the first priority of your opponent. All of its stats gets used faster. It essentially has more tempo. That's what you're talking about with the initiative, right? It has half initiative because you're forcing your opponents to address it first. And in that sense, when we're calculating for the tempo values of that, it's being shifted forward. And it's being shifted forward because your opponent has to deal with it. And so that accounts for all the stats. So we've broken the Taunt back into its two parts. Its protective function, which uses the stats of the minions that you have on your board, and its tempo function, which compares it to the stats of the opponent's minions, because that's who you're going to match up with. And so it's getting really complicated. But fortunately, we had the background of all the board states, which came in very handy to do this new Taunt thing. So Taunt is insanely complicated now. And, you know, that's all good and everything. But the more interesting part, I think, and when we redid Taunt, was that I thought about it and I was like, wait, so what's Stealth doing? Isn't Stealth literally the reverse of Taunt?
Right, because with Taunt, you're saying you have to interact with this. And Stealth is saying you cannot interact with this. Yeah. Well, and there are obviously exceptions to both of those statements, right? There's ways to get around a taunt or to silence it, whatever. There's ways to interact with a stealth minion. But typically when you play those, that is your goal. And that is what usually happens with those.
So when it comes to stealth, when it comes to taunt, you want a bigger board of stuff you want to protect, right? The more things you can protect, the better. The more things that need protection that you're going to protect, the better. You have like 3 Cult Masters to protect, perfect. Your Mogushan gets extra value, right? If you have like a 1/1 Wisp to protect, your Mogushan is not getting a whole ton of value there. So whenever you play something on curve, for example, that has a taunt, it doesn't do much. It just prevents some face damage. That's all it does because you have no other minions. On the other hand, if you use it to protect something with an ability, it becomes a lot better. So this also has to do with how you, like, if you're thinking about it this way, you should think about like how you're actually playing in a game, right? Like a lot of people just want to like drop the thing with the taunt because it's a good minion. No, what you kind of want to do is bait your opponent to do something, and then you put out something with an ability the next turn, and have them not be able to address it because they don't have a board yet, and the turn after that you slam the big taunt down, and you're like, ha, you can't get through now, I have a Cult Master. Like, if at all possible, right? So Stealth is the exact opposite. It's really good if there's no other minions on the board. In fact, it's really kind of crappy if you have a bunch of other minions on the board. Because who cares if your minion is Stealth? They're going to kill your other minions, right? Like, if they can't remove your whole entire board, they'll just focus on the minions besides the one you stealth. And it's not like you can pick which one you stealth. It's just the minion you're playing from your hand. That's always the minion that is stealth. So stealth and taunt are exact inverses, whereas stealth is better on curve in the beginning of games when you don't have a board, when you're coming back onto the board. Taunt protects more things as you have more things to protect on the board. So as it gets later in the game, as the board gets more messy, as you can do more creative stuff. This is setting aside the survivability and reach aspect of both types of cards, which, you know, hasn't changed because we've always been calculating that. But I just thought that was an interesting thing to kind of bring up as a thinking point because it does help you in gameplay. Like, this is how you should be using taunts. This is how you should be using stealth. to get the most value out of it. Like the same way that we're calculating what the average value of these cards are using assumed board states, you should know which board states are better for which, and so you should know when to hold in the card and when you're just like, well, this ideal board state will never happen for me because of my situations, I'm just going to play it, right? Like if you're so on the board, they don't have anything on the board, just play your stealth minion as a minion, you know, it doesn't matter. On the other hand, if you're about to lose the board, maybe don't play your stealth minion yet. Maybe wait till you've lost the board so you can just play one giant stealth minion and then not do other stuff or use a small removal or something else so that your opponent has to attack your face, and then you can do the whole board flip the next turn using essentially double the amount of mana that you were normally able to use. So these are all like, this is the interplay of how to use stealth and taunt effectively. And these are very difficult cards to use effectively. And I think a lot of people that, you know, in coaching and whatever, they mess up these little things. And it does have an impact on whether you win or lose the game sometimes. Okay, so that's taunt and stealth. I thought that was really interesting. So it's this is the first implementation of this into our tier list, and so the numbers all changed and we're pretty happy with it. We'll refine it a little bit more in a few weeks, but the numbers shouldn't be making major changes from here on out, but you still may see, like, you know, 1, 2, 3 point adjustments depending. But you will see something that is one of the things that we were always a little uncomfortable with, which was that high attack, low health minions with taunt seem to be getting a little more love than they should have. And vice versa, and large taunts didn't get enough compared to small taunts, and we were balancing it in a certain way that was not very elegant, and now it's all kind of solved. So I'm very happy about that, right? Like, if you're trying to make an algorithm to do all this stuff, and like you figure out how taunt and stealth works, and you have a system that can actually do it instead of just like adding random, like not random, but like adding not very precise points to its function, right? Like the points you add to a taunt as a ratio to its actual like utility is not like, that's not how we were doing it before. That's not how anyone up to this point had been doing it correctly, at least, like precisely. And now we're getting precision. So anyway, final thing that we did, I mean, we did a lot more than this, but these are like the highlights, the things that moved a lot of things a lot. Class scaling. And you'll love this, Merps, because I remember telling this to you and you're like, not enough. For a lot of the classes, we upped the tempo, because like right now behind this tier list, there's not actual cards anymore. There's just like abilities and like characteristics, and they put them together. So we can very easily say like, tempo goes up. And so the classes without initiative all had their tempos moved up a little. So like your mage, your druid, your rogue stayed the same, but your hunters, your warriors, your warlocks, they had their tempo factors moved up a lot, which means any non-situational cards, any kind of curve cards, lower cards got more boost. And we did it, we worked its way into our hero power system so that it's actually adjusting based on how much the hero power like doesn't have tempo compared to mage, for example. So it's actually mathematical. It's not like we just picked a number and we were like, you get more tempo. So I think this is something we hadn't been considering before. And our tier list as of the last expansion couldn't do anything like this before because the hero power wasn't baked into the core. But now it can. And so we've done it. And I think the numbers look a little better. Even though Merp still wants an even more aggressive hunter. We'll see if we can make that happen.
Never aggressive enough.
It's already getting so much freaking bonus for like reach, and now it's getting bonus for tempo the same way warrior and warlock gets.
I have to say, few people do play hunter as aggressively as I do.
Exactly. And this is trying to get the like ideal way to play based on the meta and the average draft kind of thing.
What more ideal way is there than number 1 NA? Come on.
Okay. I mean, if you're breaking like laws of mathematics here, I can't. Like the algorithm isn't going to keep up with you. Is my play? But yes,
too good for the algorithm.
But yeah, like one of the things we do is we make sure everything's on a string, so things move for a reason, right? We try our best not to like have things move without a reason, just because like we don't like this. Now, if we don't like it, there's usually a reason for it, and we're like, okay, there may be a bug, or maybe not be thinking about it exactly correctly. But we don't want it to just be like, well, for some reason, we're going to give Hunter like a whole ton of tempo. We would have to connect the tempo of the Hunter probably with like its reach function in a different way than we're currently connecting it now, and that will affect every single class based on the amount of tempo and reach cards they have. And obviously it'll affect Hunter more because of the hero power. But you know, that stuff, it may happen once we delve into it a bit more. But right now I'm happy that Hunter is a little more aggressive. We're telling you to draft it a little more aggressively than we used to. And again, I'm sure you guys know I don't play Hunter that aggressively. So I'm never like, oh, we need to make Hunter even more aggressive. I do just fine. I have like a 6-0 Hunter right now that I'll finish later today after the arena coup. Like just a nice mid-range Hunter with no special cards. Like it works. So we'll keep an eye out on that. But yeah, it's not just Hunter. It's Warlock, it's Warrior, it's kind of Shaman, it's kind of Priest. It's stuff. Okay. And we will finally get to the prime example of why we don't just move cards down for no reason, Merps. The prime example of why everything should be connected on a string on our tier list. The story of Crypt Lord and Card Good Bad. But before we get there, you want to do a question from the GOAT?
Question from the GOAT. Okay. All right. This will be an interesting one, I think. Gives people more of a look into the process, right? Just trust the process. This question was submitted by Torjado, one of our mods, a couple weeks back, and I'm just going to toss it to you because I don't know anything about this. Basically, out of all of the new cards in the expansion, which one was the toughest one to, turn into a score, right?
Right.
We're taking this concept of a card, this ability, and all the things that all these considerations, and you have to turn it into a score. And which one was the toughest to score?
Okay, so the toughest score is obviously the Death Knights. I feel like that was almost a question that like demanded the answer be one and or all of the Death Knights. But I'm going to set the Death Knights aside for now because that goes down a rabbit hole that I don't even want to. Like, I would have to spend the next 20 minutes to really describe what the hell we're doing with Death Knights and how it connects to our systems. And half the systems it connects to, I've never even explained in public before. So even if you stalk us and you listen to every word we say, you would have no idea what's going on in the back end with that. So let's go with something a little easier, but still very complicated. And it's one that we got wrong. And it's not we didn't just get it wrong. To our credit, Hearth Arena, the other main tier list that people use, scored these cards. This is the biggest difference between us when we came out with the publication, with the tier list scores for KFT. Were these this new mechanic, which is in Vrygul, it's in Skelemancer, it's in Arrogant Crusader. It's if your opponent triggers your death rattle, you get something. If you trigger your death rattle, you get nothing. And obviously new mechanic, obviously you had to really think through how the game worked. And we concluded that these cards were total trash. And the Hearth Arena guys concluded that this was a totally good card that was definitely above average. Significantly above average, actually, a lot of these. But like Vrygul will be average, Arrogant Crusader will be significantly above average, Skelemancer will be good, that kind of stuff. And so it was very different. It was on polar ends of it. And they have changed their scores, and we have changed our scores now. They have come down 2/3 of the way to our score, essentially, and we have gone up 1/3 of the way to their score. So we were both wrong. To our credit, we were wrong a little less. But still, we were both wrong. And it meant that a lot of people who really know this game and do really well in the arena looked at this seemingly pretty innocent mechanic that it was not hand buffs all of a sudden, right? It wasn't something too crazy. And we had very stark opinions, right? We put our foot down. We're these cards suck. They're these cards are great. No one took a halfway position and was I don't know. And it turns out they're actually somewhere in the middle. So they're very difficult to do. But what we ended up doing with these cards is we ended up turning them, the way we had thought about it was that these cards are basically crappy stealth cards, where a stealth card would basically say your opponent can basically not hit it, right? These cards would say your opponent basically can't hit it, but if they want to, they can choose to hit it and take a penalty. And the penalty is whatever the death rattle is. And in return, on top of that, how it's different from stealth is that you do get to hit your opponent's face every turn with it. Because these cards also have only 2 health each. Or Vrygul only has 1 health. You're not going to eat anything. the part that we screwed up on, which is why we thought these cards were total crap, because if the card actually was the way we described that card, it would be total crap. Like, because that's how we put it in our algorithm, and it turned out to be totally bad. Like Vrygul right now, to give you an idea of how good Vrygul is, Vrygul right now in Mage is a 77. It is next to Pantry Spider. It's still not a good card. It's a very bad card. But a Pantry Spider is sometimes draftable, right?
You know it. I love Pantry Spider.
Better than a Magma Rager, right? And before, we had this card, like, actually, like, I think, like, a couple points below a Magma Rager.
So, wait, we did?
Yes, we had a couple points below a Magma Rager, which you signed off on, very specifically because I asked you. Because these cards required more thinking. Anyway, the two differences that we made, that we made changes to, is its effective health. Instead of counting it as its effective health, like before, we just figured like, what are the chances your opponents kill it, and what are the chances you kill it, right? And if your opponent kills it, we give you this death rattle, and if you kill it, we don't. And then we give it the extra stealth function. So on top of that, we're now giving it extra effective health, because the extra effective health, not the actual health itself, but we're changing your opponent's propensity to kill this minion. Like, we're actually affecting how likely it is your opponent will kill this minion. Normally, it's like, if you have like a 10 health minion, it'll take your opponent X number of turns to kill the minion. If you have a 1 health minion, your opponent will kill the minion really freaking quickly. And now, we're just basically giving it its secondary body's health on top of that. Because if your opponent wants to kill this, it's not likely to, because it will get the bonus of the next card. So it's not just getting these stats for free, but it's changing its percent chance to like live through a turn. And that was a necessary thing, because that's how the card actually functioned. The card would come out on the board and you would not really want to kill it, even though you could, right? Even if you had a hero power, you could just ping it off. You wouldn't really want to do it. So we did that. That didn't shake it up too much. But then we did something that was just an overall change in all the cards, and it actually affected other cards more than this. But we had not yet implemented buff synergies to cards that don't explicitly get buffed by buffs. So like, if you had your Primal Fin-like thing that's in the Paladin, that, you know, if you buff it, like, it gets its buffs back, that was accounted for. On the other hand, we weren't accounting for things like, even like Devil's Roar Egg wasn't accounting for it. So Devil's Roar Egg went up by like 70 points. Like, it was ridiculous, because we had been screwing that card up. But in the same way, because these cards had a death rattle that would only be triggered when your opponents remove it, and if you made this card a lot more threatening, you would be forcing your opponents to remove it, we also gave it a more interesting interaction that I won't totally reveal. But we gave it a more interesting interaction with buffs, which made it go up a little bit more, and which is true. This is also why it's better in Paladin than in other classes. And a lot of the times people came up to us and they're like, you're rating these cards too low. They are like so good, and I got a 12-win run with it. And I'm like, you used Paladin, didn't you? And they're like, yes. So? And I'm like, well, if you have a card on the board that your opponent doesn't want to remove and you're a class based on buffs, it's going to be better, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and you can especially see it with the Scalamancer, where the punishment for removing it is so big. I want to see what the difference is. Like, Vrygul is not that bad, right? Like, Vrygul is a 3-1, gives a 2-2. It's not the worst thing in the world. Scalamancer and Paladin, on the other hand, is a 104. And Scalamancer overall is a 94. That's a 10-point difference from, like, a normal deck to a normal Paladin deck. Whereas Vrygul has, like, a 3-point difference. Just because the body that you get from a Vrygul is a 2-2, and the one you get from a Scalamancer is an 8-8. Like, that's a huge difference. Okay, so that's, I guess, so that was one of the difficult cards we valued.
Cool.
I think that answers the question from the GOAT. Question from the GOAT is brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Yeah, that's how we keep the lights on at the Lightforge. And if you want, head over there and feed the GOAT. So yeah, thank you again to our patrons. And we will end this with Card Good Bad and Class Talk Mage, which is what we're going to play after this podcast. So the Card Good Bad, Merps, you want to take this? I've already spoiled that it's Crypt Lord.
Yeah, it's Crypt Lord. So for those of you who don't know, I'm going to give a small history. I tend to hate on cards quite often. I think I can count on one hand the number of times in which I've really, really liked a card instead of hated on a card. Although to be fair, when I really like a card, I am usually correct on it. But I also hate on a lot of cards. And this is one that I hated on. And, you had your little mini campaign of sort of hashtag free Crypt Lord,
Yes.
or whatever hashtag thing you do nowadays.
No need for hashtags. It was just so good. I didn't even need a campaign. I just needed to mention that you were hating on the card. And everyone was like, oh no, this is the best card.
Yeah. But so Crypt Lord was one that I didn't really like. And for the Mogushan reason, right? Kind of the attack is just really, really small. It's one. It's got one attack. What is one?
The second smallest attack possible in the game.
Second smallest attack. It still does something, but it's like tickling your enemies, right? And we don't tickle in the arena. Okay, we go for victory here. So it was something that I thought was not just not as impactful. Stat wise, you're getting a ton of stats, right? You're getting a lot of stats, and you get something that keeps on growing as well. But as I've used it, it's been pretty good, and I think I'll leave it to you to explain sort of what is good about Crypt Lord.
Okay, so this was originally always going to be one of the best cards in Druid, like according to the algorithm. And when it came out, Merps recoiled in horror and said there is a bug. There is no way this card should be that high. And then I said, okay, I'll look into it. And then, me and the dev team looked into it quite a bit, and we're like, there's no bugs. This is kind of just how good this card is supposed to be. Because while stats on a one-attack minion is not worth that much, it does have Taunt, and we've just already established from the earlier conversation that when it comes to protecting things, the health on the Taunt still matters like a ton. And on top of that, it's getting a lot of stats. Like, if you really work through it, like, if you play it just on turn 3, it may not get that many stats, but it's going to definitely live through 1 turn, probably live through 2 turns, and if you just play 1 minion each turn after that, you're still getting a 1/8, literally a Mogushan for 3 mana. That's pretty good. But more importantly, what if you played it later on in the game, which is most likely, like we always say this, right? You're much more likely to play any 2, 3, 1-drop, whatever, not on curve. Much more likely than actually on curve. Just because you'll draw them later. You draw way more cards over the course of the game. And sometimes you have duplicate functions, right? You have like two mana cards on turn 2. You can only play one of them. So if you play Crypt Lord later on, and the algorithm takes into account all this stuff, like really precisely. So if you play this later on in the game, you're playing with another minion, right? Maybe even with 2 minions. And so it starts out pretty beefy. And then if you're playing in a way in which the opponent's board is empty or empty-ish, you can just keep growing it. This thing just never dies. And it will give your minions, all the rest of your minions that don't have Taunt, it will give all of them initiative for the rest of the game. Because your opponent will just not be able to get through your Crypt Lord. That means you can use your minions to hit their face. You can use your minions to get good trades. You're protecting anything with an ability. Like, they will definitely need direct damage to get through. They can't, like, charge. They can't have a minion on the board that lives in attack. They can't use weapons. It does so much protecting that its protection function is just so high through the roof. So if you just play out your turns, Crypt Lord comes in, it's a 1/6, you give it, like, let's say 1 more minion, it's a 1/7, it survives a turn, you then play 2, maybe 3 minions, it gets 2, 3 more stats, X% chance, survives more turns, you just keep rolling it down, which is what the algorithm does. It ends up just with a ton of stats. And it ends up with a ton of stats because that's how useful it is. It just gets these stats. So after Merps hated on it for so much, people actually played it. Merps actually played with it, and he's like, all right, this is a premium card. Like, it didn't seem like it when you're just looking at it as a 1 mana less Mogushan, which I agree, a 1 mana less Mogushan would not be as good as Crypt Lord. It would not be, like, literally, for the commons and the rares, it is right now the 2nd best card in Druid. Druid of the Swarm is the best card. This is better than Swipe. And Swipe has also been getting worse every single expansion. Because kind of the same reason Fireball gets worse. Like, all the things that deal like mid-range damage keep getting worse because they keep adding minions that these mid-range things don't kill. Whereas before, like, it killed pretty much everything. At least with the hero power, it would kill everything. Now, like, so many things have 6 health. But anyway, so we have gotten rid of the Merps penalty on Crypt Lord, which is by far the largest Merps penalty on any of the new cards. And it is totally gone now. It has taken its rightful place. I will caveat this with... There is going to be an update, like probably like 2-3 weeks from now, that will slightly change all the stats in everything to adjust better for the meta. So this may go a few points, and the higher the card is, the more numbers it's going to move because it's adjusting by percents. So it may go a little higher or like a little lower than this. It's not like we're just calling it as the second best Druid card forever, but it's good, and it is one of the reasons that Druid is as good as it is. I mean, nowhere near an ultimate infestation, right? But like, just as far as the other cards go, it's right there in the super premium.
Yep. So Crypt Lord, good card.
No.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. I think we should move on to Mage now. And we promise card good bad next week will not be a Druid card. I know we've done 2 Druid back-to-back cards, but it's really the most interesting class right now in the arena. So we've been doing that, but we'll do something else next week. Mage, why don't you talk a little about Mage, because we're about to play the Mage, and we're on kind of like a weird streak, you said, right, for like Arena Coop.
Yeah, we've been doing fairly well. So we're in the past 5 weeks we've gone 12, 9, 8, 8, 8, which is not bad, definitely. And we haven't exactly been playing the best classes, and we can't just because it's the Arena Coop. I'm hoping that it continues this week, but I am skeptical. And part of the reason is because Mage is in a tough position these days. We've talked about it in previous weeks, why sort of Mage is not top tier anymore, and it comes down to the fact that Mage hasn't gotten any really good big cards this expansion. Cold Wraith is a very good card. Breath of Sindragosa is a pretty good card, but they are small, right? Ghastly Conjurer just helps you stall, but how, like...
So for those who don't know, Cold Wraith is the 3/4 card that draws a card if it freezes. Breath of Sindragosa is 1 mana, deal 2 damage, and freeze an opponent, but it's like a random opponent minion. Or like random, is it random opponent? Yeah, random opponent minion, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You can't randomly freeze their face and deal 2 damage. And Ghastly Conjurer is a 4 mana 2/6 that adds a mirror image to their hand. So these cards just kind of like, while they might be good, they don't help the Mage win the control game, which was something that the Mage was incredibly strong with before. Like, with the exception of a good priest deck, mages in the Angoro meta could feel very comfortable going into the late game, right? And really, if I drafted sort of even an average-ish mage deck, I could go into any mid-range or control matchup and say, with my decision making and the quality and size of my deck, I should be able to win. That's definitely not the case anymore. The size of your deck is going to be smaller than most control decks. You still have the flexibility of the hero power. You still have some things that you can do, especially tempo-wise, now that you have the new KFT cards. But the Mage is just in a weird spot. It doesn't have enough aggressive cards. For example, you said Breath of Sindragosa can't go face, right? And it didn't receive any, new Frostbolts or Fireballs, and for good reason. And so what do? You get onto the board and then you follow it up with like a Ghastly Conjurer. Like, it doesn't fit anything. So Mage it doesn't have a defined role like it did before. When you go into an Angoro draft with Mage, 95% of the time you're playing a slow, control-oriented Mage, and you felt comfortable with it. Or even like a slow control elemental Mage, right? And now, like, it's very tough to go into a draft and with a predetermined sort of play style in mind.
Yep, it's true. I like Mage better this way, but it's definitely less powerful than it used to be. So I think it's more interesting, and I do like that. So one thing that's happened in KFT that's come out is the classes are pretty balanced right now, most of them. Yeah. Like, you take aside Shaman, you take aside Warrior, And the rest of the classes, I would say to a normal player, are probably pretty balanced. And to a good player, they're still within the like right bounds. Like your priest is a little weaker. Your druid may be like, you know, like a clear number 1 now, or like druid and rogue would be clear number 1s. But they're not like even like, we still have druid in the top tier with rogue and paladin. It hasn't like jumped a tier or anything. Even so, the balance is overall pretty good right now, and they've managed to do this while pushing mage down definitively into an average class. So I would say right now arena class balance, at least, is actually like in the best place that it has been since MSG. Like MSG was like right before 7.1 was like the definitively best meta of like all kinds of ways.
Sure.
Especially after they got rid of like Abyssal Enforcer with that 50%. It lowered Warlock back down to regular range, and then that was right. Kind of like the golden everybody can do things meta.
I need to say basically, because people I think miss out on the context of statements such as this. When you say it is the best in terms of balance, because some people equate, it's like, oh, you're saying the arena is the best it's ever been?
No. I'm saying class balance. It's very specific.
Exactly. It's a very specific thing. And I know you're just like, oh yeah, of course. Like people will obviously understand what I mean, but just want to make sure. Yeah, when we talk about class balance, it is very different from... I
just mean right now, if you pick a warrior, you're just like expecting crap. If you pick a shaman, you should expect crap. If you pick any of the other classes, you expect to be about even. In terms of your chance to win, which is a good thing, and it's something that Blizzard should be worrying about. And I don't know if they specifically made cards in the arena or whatever for this. I don't know how much work the micro adjustments are doing for this. But overall, just by pure feel, it feels fine. HS replay stats seem to back that up, that things are fairly even. And so that's all I mean. In terms of how fun the arena is or how much skill affects your chance to win, a different story. But, you know, in terms of mage, which is what we're talking about, and the drop in mage in class power, I think that's pretty remarkable that mage can drop in power and the classes can still like maintain even. And I think maybe that was always what was tied, right? Maybe you had to kill the mage to make the classes have even powered, and this was a pretty good way to do it in terms of like killing the mage without giving it totally trash cards. I
agree. I think that is and look, mage has been on top for so long. Them getting knocked down a peg, it's not even them getting knocked to the bottom, right? They've just gotten knocked down a peg, and the meta hasn't settled yet, especially because there might be changes coming to the synergies. There just will be changes coming to the arena one way or the other.
There's definitely changes coming to synergy. They've already changed synergies like 4 times already, and they're continuously changing. That's the whole thing, right? They're going to continuously change synergies. We're never going to really know what's going on, and that's going to happen. They still haven't said what the actual offering bonus is. I don't know if anyone has, but I still think it's below 100% and above 50%, somewhere in there, which is what I've been like kind of operating under, but
who knows? Anyways, yeah, that's where the mage is right now. Feel free to pick mage if you've been sort of spamming mage throughout Ungoro and you feel very comfortable with it. Just recognize that the playstyle is a little bit different. And the way that you draft, there's no safety blanket that you can hold on to. It's not the guaranteed control mage of the Ungoro meta.
Yep. All right. Well, that's it for this week. We will see you next week in the KFT meta. This is ADWCTA.
This is Merps. Good luck in the arena, guys.